Let's head out and talk to Jason Timpf. He's the host of Hoops Tonight on the Volume Sports Network. We've had him on a few times this year talking Warriors basketball. He's locked into Golden State. And I'll tell you, Jason, you've now come on the show with us enough that our listeners know who you are. And so the Warriors beat Milwaukee about 2 weeks ago. They're 2-4 since then. And my listener, Uncle Looney, says, hey, Jason Timpf, tell me something good about the Warriors. Can you do that?
Some of it's just tough matchups. I think we've known at this point for a while about the Warriors that Steph can't just be, 27 points on, moderate efficiency for this team to win. He has to be amazing, which nobody can be amazing that frequently, not even the best player in the world, not even Jokic, not even when we go back to LeBron and MJ and their peak. It's a completely ridiculous thing to expect out of a star. And essentially, on nights when Steph doesn't make the superhero shots, it comes down to Wiggins and Kuminga and Klay as secondary options, and all of them have been inconsistent in different ways this year, right? And even Wiggins, I had a listener ask the other day, what's the difference between Wiggins now and what he was 2 years ago? And it really is this simple. He's about 10% worse as a jump shooter, and he's about 10% worse at finishing at the rim, which has made him inconsistent, which has made it so that, in that Knicks game, for instance, you could just tell his jumper was a little off. It was a little flat. It was a little off side to side. And so once that happens, you could really tell in that game the Knicks were sagging off into the paint on everything. And one of the things I've noticed, and this is something to keep an eye on the future matchups, because they have Memphis tonight, and that's a relatively light game. But after that, it's the Pacers. And Steph shot them out of the building to start. He hit, 5 threes in the first couple quarters, if I remember correctly. But they're another team that has, Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard, some really physical guards that can kind of make Steph work hard. The Timberwolves, exact same thing with Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels. The Heat with Terry Rozier and Caleb Martin. The Magic with Jalen Suggs. He's going to go through literally a complete gauntlet of really good perimeter defenders right now. And they're going to need other guys to step up. That's going to be an absolute necessity over this next game stretch. But if they can get through those next 4 games after the Grizzlies game, things lighten up pretty significantly on the schedule. So it really is just about surviving the next couple of weeks.
Oh, Jason, you mentioned Steph, and everything revolves around him. But in listening to your latest episode on the Volume Sports of host of Hoops Tonight, and I would encourage everyone to go check it out. You made headlines basically referring to Stephen Curry as the most skilled player ever. And for those of our audience members who didn't get a chance to listen to it, number one, why? And then secondly, who else would you have up there as far as greatest skilled players ever? Kind of what's your criteria for that?
Well, it's one of those things where there's 2 different angles to it. There's the Steph angle in a vacuum, which is, it's really this simple. If you're ranking the best basketball players of all time, in your top 15, it's all dudes that are at least 6'6" and freakishly athletic, a lot of really big centers and forwards. Even the guards on that list are like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, 6'6", freaky athletes, right? And so here, I personally think Steph is the 5th best perimeter player of all time. If you're including centers on that list, he's still going to be top 10 for the vast majority of basketball fans out there. And that dude is doing it at 6'3", and he's underrated as an athlete, but he doesn't have the physical gifts that most of these other guys in that list have. And so really it's that simple. Who's the most skilled basketball player of all time? The one guy who's won primarily with skill, who's cracked the top 10 of the best basketball players of all time. You really don't have to overthink it beyond that point. Now, as far as Kyrie goes, I think where people get confused is it's Kyrie can do some things that Steph can't. Yeah, you're right. Kyrie can do some things that Steph can't. But Steph is a significantly better shooter than Kyrie Irving, and he's nearly as good as a ball handler. And those 2 things he's been able to weaponize enough, both on ball and off the ball, to impact winning at a significantly higher level. It really is that simple to me. I think people are confusing versatility with the sheer force of nature that is Steph's skill set. And can Steph hit turnaround fadeaways out of the post the way that Kyrie can? No, but why would he? He doesn't need to. It doesn't even make sense with his release because he shoots more on the way up. So, I think people are just getting kind of confused by that specific element. other guys that I would include on that list as most skilled players of all time, Kobe's a big one for me, just in terms of like the sheer degree of polish that he had in his footwork and in his handle. Going on more on the big guy side of things, I still think Jokic, like just his overwhelming touch that he has in combination with his size. I don't think we've seen a big guy that's as skilled as he is. But again, like to me, we get into these weird kind of side debates, but like what is actually impacting winning? Like Steph is substantially better as a shooter than Dame and than Kyrie and those guys, and that has been enough to build a gap. And so to me, it doesn't even make sense to give that sort of credit to those guys when Steph's been doing that for years.
Jason Timpf joining us on 95.7 The Game. He's the host of Hoops Tonight on the Volume Sports Network. Interesting how you phrased it, because I actually look at it a little bit opposite, and here's what I mean. Like, I do believe if, let's say, Steph's 6'3", that he's the greatest player or the most impactful player ever, 6'3" or smaller. But when you say skilled, then I tend to lean Jokic, because I just think it's easier for a smaller guy, and I'm not saying you're wrong or I'm right, but for a bigger guy to be as skilled as Jokic, I think is like almost more impressive than a 6'3", 6'4" guy who's super skilled like Steph.
That's super interesting. Almost looking at it from the standpoint of like hand-eye coordination, natural ability.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, because for instance, Steph can like pick up a golf club and become really good at it right away.
Well, that's true.
That sort of thing. To your point, though, like we all have different criteria with this kind of stuff, and so like even like what does most skilled mean? Are we including like off-ball movement, because that's a skill that Steph's really good at, right? Like even just on-ball playmaking. I think one last thing I'll say, I think Kyrie works on the ball more than Steph, and I think a lot of Steph's off-ball work has made people believe that he's not capable of doing stuff on the ball, which is so ridiculous to me, because like if you set up a Trae Young style 4 out 1 in spam pick and roll offense for Steph, he'd average 35 points a game and 12 assists. You know what I mean? Like it to me, a lot of it has to do with the offense that Golden State runs and how that kind of gets people to underestimate Steph's on-ball skill.
Interesting. Well, we've been talking, and just to broaden the conversation about the Warriors for a lot of the show in regards to both the rest of the season, but also some of the decisions they'll have to make this summer. Last time you were on, you talked about Kuminga, the potential contract extension that could be coming his way. But right now, when you look at the Warriors as far as priorities on this roster, 1 through 15, Steph Curry aside, because he's number one, how would you prioritize the Warriors and them looking forward at who is a necessity for this team beyond this season that right now appears to be a probable play-in tournament, at best a first-round exit? It just feels like they're going to come up short based on their goals to contend for a title. And how do you look at this roster, approaching this summer, Jason?
I think a lot of it has to do with how this postseason goes. Like if they win a play-in game, and you go into the first round and you either get an upset victory or you have a really good, strong showing, or you extend the series to 6 or 7 games, even if you lost in the second round after that point. If it seems like you're close, that changes the perspective going into the offseason. Now you're looking for more moves on the margins to bring in veteran talent to try to push yourself over the top. Maybe you sacrifice one of the younger talented pieces in draft compensation to try to bring in some additional, kind of win now pieces. But if they go in and they get their butt kicked, like they lose in the play-in tournament, and or if they get into a first-round series and get swept, and the veteran guys look like they have lost a step, then I think you go full pivot. Because like we've talked a lot about, and when I say full pivot, I mean just not any win now moves. You just kind of are thinking more in the long term. Now, what's been really fascinating to me is like we have 2 brand new pieces of information this year, which is what we talked about last time I came on about Kuminga, but also Trayce Jackson-Davis. Like Trayce Jackson-Davis, I've been blown away by the steps he's made this year as a roll man, and like little intricate details like flipping screening angles, setting Gortat screens in the lane where like he basically boxes out the rim protector so that Steph can get downhill into the lane. He's really good at the timing of when to hold a screen versus when to slip a screen. I think it's, for instance, he's always had such good chemistry with Chris Paul that game against the Knicks, he had such great chemistry with Klay.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everybody can just naturally pick up the ball screen game with him. So, like, you kind of have the front court of the future right now with Kuminga and Trayce Jackson-Davis. And so that has made it so that, like, the future actually feels more legitimate now, which makes it more complicated. And so now it's not as much, you'd have to see a real strong playoff appearance this year to justify win now moves, I would say, because at this point, you just have this young talent that's coming up that kind of feels more like a foundation.
Jason Timpf joining us on 95.7 The Game. You can hear him on Hoops Tonight, the Volume Sports Network. We're talking Warriors. I tell you what, I remember 2 or 3 months ago, when Klay Thompson, they were talking about whether he should come off the bench or not. And obviously he's making $40+ million this year. There was a report that came out that he turned down 2 for $48, $24 million a year. I didn't think it was possible that he could come off the bench and increase his value. Is that a possibility? From $24 million, from $24 million.
It's more like, again, one of the things that helps with coming off of the bench is you are playing in a phase of the game where you're expected to be aggressive and you're playing against bench players from the other team. And so I wouldn't say necessarily that it's increased his value. I think it's been more of a clear definition of the role he has to play at this point in his career, which is now he's officially, just like so many of the other great veterans in NBA history, he's officially one of those guys where, like, on any given night in the postseason, he could be in your closing five. He could be somebody that you go down with, but it's kind of like a night-by-night kind of thing, depending on the matchup and depending on how his body's feeling. But on the night-to-night stuff, he can still thrive off of the bench. And I think it's a clarity of role in a situation where he comes in and he doesn't have to worry about sharing the load. He's expected to be aggressive and just going up against some lower-level perimeter defenders in those groups.
Last one for you, Jason, for me is just kind of about this home versus road conundrum that some teams deal with, but specifically this season, Golden State. They got 18 wins on the road. Last year, they couldn't buy a road win if they tried. They had 33 home wins. This year, they got less home wins than road wins. Draymond was asked about it after the Knicks game, and he didn't really have an answer. Same for Curry, same for Kerr. I know there's probably a plethora of reasons, but why do you think the Warriors just seem to struggle at home as opposed to the road?
My best guess at that has to do with the personality dynamics in the locker room. Like, last year, I'm not sure this group liked each other as much for obvious reasons. The Draymond Green, Jordan Poole incident. Also, Jonathan Kuminga was just in a substantially smaller role and was clearly frustrated by that. I know that didn't get as much publicity last year, but from what I had heard, like, that was definitely something that was kind of rocking the boat a little bit last year. And when you go on the road, you're not going home after practice to your family and kids. It's all back to the hotel. It's team dinners. It's like everything is as a group. And so I think this year's group has just had so much better. I've even picked this up from some of the quotes that I don't know about you guys, but have you noticed the optimism coming from Steve Kerr and Steph? Like, Steph saying, that he absolutely still believes this team has a run in them, or Steve Kerr saying that he believes that. That was not the vibe coming out of the group last year. And so I think a lot of their inconsistency at home stems from just the reality of relying more on young talent and how that just inherently breeds a certain level of inconsistency. And their success on the road, their ability to maintain their level of play, so to speak, and maybe even go up a level on the road, I think it's just because they all like each other and are more satisfied in their roles. But at the end of the day, I think this particular group, just because they're in so many more younger guys are in bigger roles, between Brandon Podziemski this year taking a sizable role in the backcourt, Kuminga becoming basically a second option, Looney basically being removed from the rotation for Trayce Jackson-Davis. Like, you're relying on a lot of guys in their early 20s, which just inherently breeds inconsistency.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot. How far do they go? And I'm assuming you don't think they'll drop to 11.
I think that there's a better than likely chance that both the Lakers and the Warriors get eliminated in the play-in, just because the groups, the other play-in teams are all really good and they're going to be at home. If they can get out of that 10 seed and get up to the 8 seed by any chance, that monumentally improves their odds. if they can get into the postseason, it's really just about matchups from there. Really like them against Oklahoma City, not so much against Denver and Minnesota. I'd give them a puncher's chance against the Clippers as well, just because I think that's a team that they would have some schematic advantages against. So, like, if they can get out of the play-in, there's some hope there. But it's like, what's kind of frustrating about it is when Steph Curry and Draymond Green have played this year, 23 and 16, roughly a 58% win percentage, that would put you all the way out of the play-in and at the 6th seed. And so what's really unfortunate is, like, the Draymond Green suspension and him being away from the team has kind of put them in a predicament where now they have to do something like escape the play-in tournament, and there's just a certain level of variance there. Yeah. And again, now we just talked about the youth. You're relying on young guys in a must-win game on the road. Like, there's just a lot more variance there. But if they can get out of the play-in and they get a right matchup, I think they're capable of beating anybody. Because, like, again, I think the Warriors are firmly in the same tier as teams like Phoenix and Sacramento and the Pelicans and all those teams. Doesn't reflect in the standings because of the Draymond suspension, but I think they're just as good as those teams. So, like, they're just as capable as anybody else. It's just those really good teams at the top, the Denver, the Boston, Milwaukee, the Clippers. Those are the teams where it gets more complicated.
Good stuff, Jason. As always, really appreciate it. And if they do go to the postseason, maybe we'll talk to you again. Otherwise, no promises. I'm messing with
guys.
you.
I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to next time.
All right, that's Jason Timpf.
He's great.
Yeah, he's good.